I thought it was pretty straightforward. Do you guys have questions?
This week was pretty straightforward, right?
We had a question about, is that Peter text the only time, so when we talk in the Creed about Jesus going to hell, is it all because of that one text?
It could possibly be. I'm just going off memory here, and it could be completely wrong.
Do you want the,
Anybody see the black leather bound Bible laying around? I lost it in the last 24 hours.
Oh,
That'd be crazy.
What is it?
Well, anyways, I was gonna say, well, I did, we don't need to text.
19 to 20.
That's the main text. If there are any others, we don't pay a whole lot of it. They don't come up much in discussion. And so by default, we can just say that's one for sure. If there are, I don't know off the top of my head what they are.
I was
You're talking about
surprised.
his descent into hell.
Yeah, I was surprised for something that like made it to the Creed. There wasn't more clear, because even that text in Peter, I mean, it's kind of confusing.
That's how he preached to the spirits. Yeah.
In prison, yeah. And it talks about their connection to Noah.
Yeah. And I was reading a commentary thing about, it's kind of like, okay, when the teacher comes down to lecture you and is lecturing the entire class, but seems to pay an extra close attention to a group sitting over here in the corner, it almost gives the impression that he came down to preach to the spirits that were imprisoned. Almost like, and he was especially talking to those people from Noah's time. I don't know, maybe I else got that impression, at least I'm not saying from the text, but from the commentary that they're writing. Yeah, that is been a topic that has come up many times over the years. And really the question you asked, it's like, it seems like such a small thing to make it all into the Creed. Now, why do you think that is?
Does it, if you read, like the Creed, does it have like references, Bible references on where, why they have that as part
And
of the
I'm
Creed?
sure they probably give the
You would think that they would have when they wrote that.
yeah. Why else do you think they feel the need? Well, if I say this, I'll just give away what I'm looking for. Why else? Like, why do they say anything about that in the Creed? Any other human reasons that might lead them to want to say something about that in the Creed?
Weren't most of the things in the Creed disputed? So they wanted to come up with an orthodox view.
So there are controversial things. And so what might be, and again, we're not going to pull up like a proof text to say this, that, or the other thing, but what might be an improper way to think about, I'm just going to give it away, that the issue is that time frame from when Jesus dies on the cross to when he rises from the dead. There's a few minutes that go by, right? Lots of minutes that go by. What in the world was going on during that time? And so there were conversations that were coming up in the church about what was, and it was hard to find things in Scripture to support some of the things that were right. So let me give you an example. What if someone said, "Oh, I know what Jesus did. After he died, he went to hell and suffered for the sins of the world." What would we as Christians say to that?
He never sinned.
Right. Well, he never sinned, true, but
Did all his suffering.
yeah, he did all the suffering on the cross, and so we would point to saying, At the cross, Jesus said, "It is finished." And so, at least as Lutheran Christians, we say that those words indicate that the payment for the sins of the world was done right there. It was all of his suffering on the cross, all of the torture, all of those things that he faced. That's where the payment for sins was done. So we would say, well, didn't Son of God to hell and suffer for the sins of the world, because he said on the cross, "It is finished."
Although the creed wouldn't really dispute that, because it doesn't say he did. He just, like, when I thought the way the creed reads, you could think that he suffered.
Right,
hell.
it kind of leaves it a little open, right? He descended into hell, and what's the very next line? Then on the third day, he rose again from the dead. So it doesn't get real specific there.
I always thought it was just his body in the grave.
Okay, so
That
which-
was my, kind of my thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
What else does he say on the cross before he's?
Because he says, today you're gonna be with me in paradise.
Uh-huh.
So that's why I thought his soul went directly to heaven. I never considered
Yep. And they
his soul
talk
going
about
to
that.
hell.
They talk about that this year, right?
He says into your hands.
As I commit my spirit, right? So, and they talk about that a lot, about the separation of body and soul. So we would say, the scripture seems to say that the body is buried in the ground. Jesus' body is buried in the ground, and Jesus' spirit went to be with the Father. And so nothing in there would indicate that Jesus suffered in hell. And so I think part of the creed, although you're right, Sarah, it doesn't really say it clearly. He just says he descended into hell. And part of that is probably the desire not to say anything more than we know. And so that First Peter text says that he went and preached to the spirits in prison. And
Is that a normal way in the scriptures to talk about hell as prison? I feel like it doesn't normally refer to hell as prison.
Right.
maybe not with that exact word, but when you think about when Jesus is telling the story / parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and the rich man is down, is in hell, and Lazarus is by the Father's side, and what does he say exists between them? A great chasm, to kind of indicate that there's no busting out of there. You can't cross that. And so I try to think of imagery like, I don't know, Alcatraz sitting out there on the island. There's this chasm. There's this. If I'm stuck on one side of a giant canyon and I can't get across, I am imprisoned where I am. So maybe the imagery of it in that sense kind of gives a sense of finality to it. Maybe, I guess. Kind of, sort of. Other things that came up there. I think our understanding I think there's great comfort in when it comes to the time of death, how we read the scriptures, and understanding that when a loved one dies, there are things that we can say for sure, like is your loved one safe with Jesus instantly when they die? Yeah, without a doubt, right? Today you'll be with me in paradise, Father. Your hands are kept on my spirit. At the same time, that person goes and they go to the funeral home, and whether the body is cremated or embalmed and buried, whatever it might be, in their human minds, like, well, there's a body right there. There's a body in the ground. How does my brain make sense of that? Well, the scriptures clarify that very, very clearly, is that the body does go into the ground. The body will become dust. Yeah. And on the resurrection day, that separation that occurs, there is this horrible ripping apart. I mean, the most terrible thing about death, physical death for us, is this kind of this tearing apart of a human being. And on the final resurrection day, this the glorious idea of we will be whole again. We will be completely put back together the way that God originally designed us to be. He didn't design us to be just spirit. He didn't design us to be just physical matter. He designed us to be both. And it's just such a beautiful thing. So we can deal with the, for lack of a better word, the science of it. But yeah, I mean, if you go to a graveyard and open up a casket that's been buried for years, you're going to see evidence that there was a physical body buried there. But at the same time, we can have comfort knowing that that person, as a believer, is safe with Jesus.
When we talk about our new bodies,
Mhm.
can we take Jesus's body as like a prototype of, Jesus, he was physical, he could eat, but he could also like walk through walls and he could like teleport. And is that a model of for us, or is that going too far to
I
start
don't
trying
know.
to do that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, that's the question all the time. I make the joke. I say, well, we're going to get our bodies back, which in one sense is kind of a bummer because I'm only 5'6". But without sin, maybe I'll be 6'5", and big muscles. You never know. So if we get our bodies back, will I get a 49-year-old body? Will I get a 29-year-old body? Will I get a 2-year-old body? Will I get an 87-year-old body? You know what? I think it'll be something so. When he talks about the imperishable, the perishable will be clothed with the imperishable, and uses the illustration of the seed, and what comes up is really, I mean, yeah, it's a physical thing that comes up, but does it really resemble much of what was buried in the ground, the seed? Not really. And so in one sense, I'm guessing that the bodies we get will still be bodies, but in another way, this idea that they will be without sin, I don't. What will they be like? What will they look like?
But I kind of go back to the Garden of Eden when God created us.
Right.
We were made to live forever.
Mhm.
And if you look at our miraculous bodies, they heal themselves.
Now, will they be able to walk through walls? I don't know.
I mean, I'm
Maybe,
just
maybe
kind of
not.
like, we're gonna go back to the way God made us. And we're still gonna have the same, the thing with the seed coming up different, I don't know if we're gonna be that, or are we going to actually have our bodies that we're going to do the way God made them before sin. And, even, I guess we will never get hurt again, but even if we did, our bodies are made to heal themselves.
Oh, I think we'll be just like, do I think there'll be trees in heaven?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Animals,
Yeah.
I sure hope so.
You try to imagine like a world without, even,
The ocean.
or even like a world without babies.
Well, that's my other thing.
I don't know.
What happens to babies? Do they grow up in heaven
Right,
before or after we get there?
right.
You have all these little babies that are,
Maybe we'll
Have
just
died.
all be like 6 months old and we'll just all. Who knows?
I probably should report the Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis is like an interesting. How the essence of the story is the guy goes to like this heaven type place, and he can't. So he feels real, but then when he gets to heaven, in contrast, he looks at himself and the other people that came with him, and they look like shadows. Like they look the same as they did before, but in contrast to where he is now, he starts calling them the ghosts because that's how it feels. Because it's not like heaven is more spiritual. It's heaven is so real that it's beyond what human experience. Like they can't even walk on the grass. They can't even like pick stuff up. They can't like, there's this realness of heaven that is just so different that it makes him pale in comparison now that he's met with this reality.
I had a pastor who used to say, if he would tell us when we were kids, when he taught us this, he's like, imagine the most brilliant colors in the world. Imagine the most beautiful sounds. And he'd say, in the new creation, there will be things beyond color. There very well may be color beyond what we know as color now. There might be sounds. Can any of us comprehend what the sounds of choirs of angels singing sounds like? Like it's beyond my little brain can't handle that.
What do you think about dogs have different hearing than we do? They can hear things that we can't.
So it reminded me of what you were saying there is that there would be something so much more real, more fully,
It's like taking your sunglasses off.
yeah, more fully human, or taking your earplugs out, or someone who's not been able to see forever, and then all of a sudden, the other illustration he used, it was a chalkboard, and he used the dry erase boards. He drew a stick figure on the board. So there's my stick figure over there. He said, "What if that's his whole world right there?" So what does he know? Well, everything's white. I'm blue. I have arms. They don't move. I have a mouth and two eyes. There's some other red stuff around, but that's my whole world. Imagine if you could take him off the board and let him move. And let him see green, or let him hear. That would be incomprehensible to him. But it's way more real than he is now. And so our realness, our fullness of what it means to be human right now, I think is just a tiny, we see as in, how's the verse go? Like in a mirror, like a foggy mirror, just an obscure image of what it'll really be. And that gets you excited about that, because you're like, I don't need to worry about wondering if all this other stuff is here, because what's going to be real is going to be so much more beyond what we're experiencing. We're so limited by sin. This world is so limited by sin that we don't get to experience the fullness of real life.
This is probably, assuredly, beyond the scope of maybe this lesson, but what really bothers me about heaven is, do we remember our sins? Wouldn't they still bother us? The other thing is, what about those people that aren't there? Wouldn't that bother us? Wouldn't that be painful? But yet we're not supposed to have pain. It's supposed to be. I mean, I guess I have a hard time understanding how that could be.
Right.
I don't think we'll even remember anything.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
I don't think it'll be a we won't, again, it'll be so far beyond how we understand life today. Like the concept of remembering. Maybe that won't even, go back to science for a minute. When they talk about the human brain, like what are the numbers? Like the percentage of our brain that we actually make use of, the function. Yeah, it's like some ridiculous amount. It's like we don't even make use of 90% of what this little thing can do up here. And I think that's I'm like, maybe in heaven we'll use our entire brain.
That would be.
Can you imagine? What will that be like? Instead of just this one little 10% part of it, maybe it'll be the full gig. That'll be. But again, beyond our comprehension. But I've had the same thoughts too. And you think about those things, you're like, well.
Yeah, well, we miss people. But that one I that didn't make it. What are your thoughts on cremation?
People always ask me that.
Is that, that's acceptable in the Lutheran church, right?
Yeah. My is a big argument. Well, there's lots of arguments in my family about stupid things, but my mom insists on being cremated, not because she has any deep theological beliefs on it. My mom's just cheap.
I'm with her on that.
That's just what she is. And she puts my dad in quite a bit of distress over it. Not because he thinks like, oh, it's terrible, wrong, you can't be cremated, but because he just wants it there to be a normal, he just likes the idea of a normal funeral service where there's a body and you bury it in the ground. He doesn't care how much it costs. He's like, whatever. And I used to tell my dad to relax. I'm like, quit bringing it up. I'm like, Dad, she'll be dead. You can do whatever you want. Who cares? But he kept on bringing it up, and so my mom went ahead and went to one of those places, got it all paid for. It's all set.
But you can have the funeral, there's so ways, you can have the funeral and then be cremated afterwards.
Yeah, they
And
do
like my
that.
cousin
And
had
that
her,
costs even more.
well, my cousin had her boyfriend
paying for both.
cremated, and he's got a headstone. So, you know, you can still have a place to go, you can still bury the ashes and have a place to go.
Yeah, I've heard different. I mean, I've heard some people say that when people say, well, should you be cremated or buried? And I have a pastor friend who said his only response is, I don't think it matters. They buried Jesus. But I'm like, well, that's okay. Yeah, that's a state of fact. They buried Jesus. Thank you for that information. I think it more becomes an issue of best practice in the sense of honoring the body as a created thing of God. Now, cremation in the world today, it's not like we just like bring Uncle Joe to the backyard and say, hey, we're having a bonfire. It's not like we're treating the body with respect. It's a very respectful process. It's a very honorable process when you go through the process of cremation. And I don't think anybody who's gone through that process is in any way, shape, or form trying to dishonor the creation of the physical body. So in that sense, I would say, as long as your intent is to say, hey, we still honor and respect the body as a created thing. You know, some people fall into the silly trap of thinking, well, what are you going to do with the resurrection of the dead if you cremated the person? I'm like, what do you think happens? Like people like in fires and plane crashes or in terrible accidents.
We got eaten by a shark.
What do you think happens to bodies when you bury them in the ground and 50 years later? I'm like, and so that logic doesn't really make sense. So really, I think it comes down to an issue of is our intention, as long as our intentions are not to dishonor the created thing that is the body, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I mean, do I think that cremation or burial could in any way, shape, or form like eliminate somebody from being resurrected from the dead? No, not in any way, shape, or form. Because it's a matter of just making sure that we're remembering that the physical body is part of human, and so we want to treat it with respect and treat it with honor and dignity for what it is.
I heard once, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard once that there were some Christians, if you kind of go back, that wanted to do a burial instead of a burning of the body because that was pagan. Like burning of the body was a way of saying we're done with this. So the Christians chose to bury as a way of saying we know that we're not done with this. So it was like a testament of faith that was supposed to counteract their culture.
Mm-hmm.
Which now it doesn't really counteract our culture anymore, you know, so I wonder
Right.
if like that testimony, you know, for some people that might still be like a really powerful testimony, but for, I mean, the culture is kind of different. So,
Yeah, honoring the body thing I read about this is that when during the time of some plague in Europe, some of these terrible things where nobody, people would just not go near people. I mean, who was it that cared for all the sick people and most contagious people? Often it was Christians. Often bodies were just left on the side of the road. Christians would often come and bury the bodies because they recognize the body as a creation of God. This was treated with dignity, treated with honor. I think that's partly why think about how Christians were often treated during the times of the greatest persecutions. That they were fed to the lions, put up as one of the, I don't remember which guy, one of the kooky ones, but which
Nero.
put them up and use them as torches
Right.
in his dinner parties.
Narrow.
And as a way to, it was just another way to dishonor this God's creative work by saying, doesn't matter. And we live in a world today that continues to dishonor the physical body. It comes up in just the way we do things in the world today. It's nothing, doesn't matter. It is just, if we're nothing more than physical creatures, and we're just willing to dishonor, what makes anybody dishonor people when they're alive? I mean, what makes anybody honor, if you don't believe we're anything more than physical beings, why even give honor to the body when we're alive? We're just nothing more than physical beings, right? And you think about it, and some people think, well, that's all we are. And so topics of, it's why things like assisted suicide and euthanasia. You're nothing more than a physical being. And so it doesn't matter. Which is just like, it shows, you think about the depravity of the mind, the depravity of the human race, that we've slid to this point of we dishonor ourselves to the extent that we don't even see our words.
I think it's when you mention that, and maybe this is a generational swing too, because I think it also swings the other way, where there's a real empowerment of the body, that your body is like whatever you want it to be, and it's the most exciting thing, and like don't let anyone tell you that there's anything wrong with any part of it, and unless it's that gets in a weird thing, because culturally, like there's some weird things happening there too, but there's some things that don't make sense together that are happening in culture, but but kind of this idea of like a refusal to accept that sin has affected your body also.
Yep.
I think that's also kind of a, maybe a pitfall about cremation, that sometimes it can be used to deny death. Well, let's just get it out of the way and not, have to deal with the fact that there is death, that this person has died. I mean, just kind of to get it,
You don't have to see it.
right, you don't have to see it, you don't have to deal with it. Face it. Not that I'm thinking that people think that all the time, but I mean, I think there could be that little bit of a pitfall sometimes.
Everybody, there's so many emotions that people deal with death, and people, for good or bad or whatever, there's just a lot of things that people have to work through when they deal with it. My kids were surprised when I was talking to them a while back, and I told them that, and some people probably true from you too, but like, that I've been sitting with a good handful of people at the moment that they physically die. It's not like the movies. There's not some like dramatic, oh, I love you. And it's okay to acknowledge that physical death is a terrible, horrible thing. It was never what God designed us. God never designed that to happen to us. It's not a part of life. Andrew Davis. Sorry, Andrea.
So tell her.
I should probably tell me my daughter's sick or something in school. But it's okay to mourn at death. It's okay to, say physical death is a terrible thing, because it is. It's not supposed to be what it is. And yet at the same time, the tremendous peace and hope that is present in Christians' lives, even in the context of that. And I've seen that in all those different places. And so, anything else? So will she ooh, somebody sent me a text. Maybe she's that fast.
No, she is. Thank you, Miss.
If I wasn't in Bible class, I always take messages from, take Andrew's phone calls because it's usually something important. Oh, she didn't.
I wanted to show you.
Yep.
Yeah.